I remember when George Bush and I took office January 1981, or as another Republican president might have put it, 4 months and 7 years ago. You know, I've waited 125 years to say that.
President Ronald Reagan opening a Republican fundraising dinner speech with one of his trademark jokes about his age. The date, May 11th, 1988. The age, 77. Today, during the 2024 presidential campaign, we hear a lot about how old the candidates are. So, let's go back and remember how the last famously old president, Ronald Reagan, handled the age issue by putting to good use one of his signature theatrical skills, comedy. In this episode of C-SPAN's Podcast The Weekly, it's the best of Ronald Reagan jokes about being old.
As more people cancel cable TV, C-SPAN's funding is at risk. This summer, an anonymous donor has stepped up to help by matching all donations up to $25,000. I'm Caitlin with C-SPAN, and this means your gift will go twice as far. Your donation supports unfiltered access to government and public affairs programming, including the C-SPAN podcasts you value. Visit cspan.org/donate to make your gift today. Every dollar helps us reach our $25,000 goal. Thank you for listening and supporting C-SPAN. Donate today at cspan.org/donate.
Since we're in the middle of convention season, let's start with President Reagan at the Republican National Convention, August 15th, 1988. He was 77 years old.
This convention brings back so many memories to a fellow like me. I can still remember my first Republican convention, Abraham Lincoln giving a speech that sent tingles down my spine. No, I have to confess I wasn't actually there. The truth is, way back then, I belonged to the other party.
That speech was billed as Ronald Reagan's farewell address to the Republican convention as president. Over the years, he addressed the convention as a private citizen, as a governor, as a presidential candidate, and as a president. And then, 4 years later, he addressed the convention again as a private citizen. It was one of his last major political addresses, and it came 2 years before he disclosed to the nation that he was suffering from Alzheimer's disease. It was August 17th, 1992. Ronald Reagan was 81 years old.
Tonight is a very special night for me. Of course, at my age, every night's a special night. After all, I was born in 1911. Indeed, according to the experts, I have exceeded my life expectancy by quite a few years. Now, this is a source of great annoyance to some, especially those in the Democratic Party.
Later that year, Ronald Reagan campaigned for the Bush Quayle re-election. October 30th, 1992, Arizona.
I'm delighted to be in Phoenix today. Heck, at my age, I'm delighted to be anywhere.
In December 1988, President Reagan paid tribute to Jack Kemp. The Republican congressman from New York, and later Bob Dole's running mate, was an architect of Ronald Reagan's free enterprise-based economic policies.
You know, I've often quoted a philosopher and historian, Ibn Khaldun, who observed that at the beginning of the empire, the tax rates are low and the revenues high. But at the end of an empire, the rates are high and the revenues low. Now, he had a bit of a jump on me. He wrote in the 14th century, which doesn't make us contemporaries.
On February 6, 1989, Ronald Reagan addressed students at the University of Southern California. It was his 78th birthday, and it was his first public appearance since leaving office.
2 weeks ago, I went into retirement. Am I glad that's over? I just didn't like retirement. Took all the fun out of Saturdays. But for 2 weeks, I tried adjusting to private life and growing old gracefully without being a nuisance to anyone. That's not my style. So here I am, saddled up and ready to ride again.
On December 13, 1988, at the age of 77, Ronald Reagan gave his final domestic policy address as president. In his Iron Triangle speech, he talked about three institutions which he said thwarted government reform: parts of Congress, the media, and special interest groups. But first, some jokes.
Yet as soon as I get home to California, I plan to lean back, kick up my feet, and take a long nap. I'll come to think of it, things won't be all that different after all. But you know, I'll rest a whole lot easier knowing that I've left the White House in good hands. There hasn't been a transition like this since Inauguration Day in 1837, when Andrew Jackson turned the keys to the store over to Martin Van Buren. And no, I don't remember that day. When you get to be my age, you don't remember anything that recent. Now,
on June 25, 1990, Ronald Reagan campaigned in Kentucky for Senator Mitch McConnell. It was Senator McConnell's first re-election campaign. Ronald Reagan was 79, Mitch McConnell was 48.
thank you all very much. And thank you, Mitch. It's a pleasure to be back here in Kentucky, which has been the home of so many great American leaders, men like Abraham Lincoln and Henry Clay, who shaped the destiny of our nation. And no, I didn't know either of them personally.
On February 8, 1992, conservatives held a dinner in Ronald Reagan's honor in New Hampshire. It was 10 days before the presidential primary and 2 days after Ronald Reagan's 81st birthday.
I understand you've gathered in New Hampshire tonight to celebrate the 42nd anniversary of my 39th birthday. I'm sorry I wasn't able to join you. Heck, at my age, you don't need big tribute dinners. I'm just as happy heading straight for Denny's to cash in on my free birthday dinner. And to top it off, I heard Sam Donaldson wasn't going to be there. So why make the trip?
You heard Ronald Reagan open with his classic comedy construct, the anniversary of his birthday. He used that again 2 years later, a Republican dinner marking his 83rd birthday. Margaret Thatcher spoke. It was February 3rd, 1994, 9 months before he told the nation he had Alzheimer's. It was his final public speech.
Thank you, Margaret, and thank all of you very much. I haven't heard such cheers since I told the Washington Press Corps I was leaving town. I don't know who cheered the loudest, them or me. Frankly, for a minute there, I was a bit concerned that after all these years away from Washington, you all wouldn't recognize me. Heck, pretty soon I'm going to have to get one of those credit cards with my picture on the front. I can't tell you how thrilled Nancy and I are to be here with you tonight to celebrate, as Margaret said, the 44th anniversary of my 39th birthday.
Also at that 1994 dinner, Ronald Reagan added this quip.
I have to admit, I'm very flattered by all the telephone calls, the letters, the signs, and especially those bumper stickers. But with all I've got going in my life right now, I'm afraid I'm not going to be able to run again for president in 1996. However, I have not ruled out the possibility of running in the year 2000.
In In 1986, at the age of 75, President Reagan gave the commencement address at Glassboro High School in New Jersey, a perfect place for his old age jokes.
Thanks for the greeting, but I know why you're so enthusiastic. You've probably heard about my earlier Hollywood connections and think I might be able to introduce you to Tom Cruise or Michael J. Fox. You know, your principal, Mr. Holland, showed me your American history book, and I was startled to see that it took almost 400 pages to tell the story of our nation. When I was your age, it only took two stone tablets.
By the way, a historical footnote to Glassboro, New Jersey. In June 1967, President Lyndon Johnson flew there from the White House, just like President Reagan did. President Johnson held a summit meeting with Soviet Premier Alexei Kosygin. The meeting was scheduled to last one day, but the two men talked for more than 5 hours. Then they held a second meeting 2 days later. It was the only Cold War summit set in an ordinary American community. Finally, as you might imagine, big media dinners were perfect venues for President Reagan's quips and comedy, like the 1984 White House Photographers Dinner when he was 73.
As you record history in the making, you yourselves are a part of historic tradition. Ever since Matthew Brady took his stirring pictures of Abe Lincoln and the Civil War, photographs have been imparting immediacy to American news. And it isn't true that I carried Brady's camera.
And referencing his press secretary, Larry Speaks, here's President Reagan at the 1988 White House Correspondents' Dinner when he was 77.
Larry also said that preparing me for a press conference was like reinventing the wheel. It's not true. I was around when the wheel was invented, and it was easier.
And now, a bonus clip. We hope you heard in this podcast some Ronald Reagan jokes you hadn't heard before. But you're probably wondering, where's his most famous line about growing old? Well, you've been patient, and now here it is. The October 21st, 1984 debate with Walter Mondale. President Reagan gets a question from Henry Truett of the Baltimore Sun, and then he says one of the most legendary lines in presidential debate history.
Mr. President, I want to raise an issue that I think has been lurking out there for 2 or 3 weeks and cast it specifically in national security terms. You already are the oldest president in history, and some of your staff say you were tired after your most recent encounter with Mr. Mondale. I recall yet that President Kennedy had to go for days on end with very little sleep during the Cuba Missile Crisis. Is there any doubt in your mind that you would be able to function in such circumstances?
Not at all, Mr. Truett, and I want you to know that also I will not make age an issue of this campaign. I am not going to exploit, for political purposes, my opponent's youth and inexperience.
At the time of the 1984 debate, Ronald Reagan was 73 years old, Walter Mondale was 56, and Henry Truett was 57. And reminder, you can do your own searches in the C-SPAN video library. Just go to cspan.org and use the search bar on top. You'll find more jokes Ronald Reagan told about his age, and maybe even a few jokes he told about other people's age. Like the time in 1988 he spoke to CPAC and said this about his Supreme Court Justice nominee, Anthony Kennedy.
So when I nominated a judge who could as easily have been my first nominee, there was hardly a peep of protest. And Judge Kennedy is now going to be Justice Kennedy, and since our opponents won't, I'll let you in on a secret. Judge Kennedy will be just the kind of justice that you and I have been determined to put on the court. Anyway, any man who teaches law school in a tri-corner hat and a powdered wig is okay by me on original intent.
That's it for this episode of C-SPAN's The Weekly. For now, thanks for listening and happy searching.